Hi, welcome to Mental Health Monday. I'm Heidi Gaiman from HeidiGaiman.com, and right now we're in our series of grief, and we're talking about loss and the many losses that come in life. And we're going to talk about the act of mourning and grief this week and next week in particular. So today we're talking about growth-oriented grief. I think it's just a reframing of something that's naturally happening for us. Number one, grief is going to be growth-oriented. That's one of the most important facts. I don't think we can go through a loss without some growth and change in our lives happening. So often we white knuckle change in our lives and we might kind of avoid it in very different ways. But loss comes into our lives in many different ways and it kind of pushes us out, if you will. Feels a little bit like the time in young adulthood when we're just kind of like pushed out of the nest. Loss acts in many ways in our lives to push us out to do just different things, different works, have a new perspective. And in that way, it's a gift. It really is. Now, that said, if you're the one who has experienced a loss, it certainly doesn't feel like a gift in that moment. And so we want to recognize those early days of loss in particular, and often sometimes as it comes up later in mourning, that we're not going to feel this growth of grief. Instead, it'll feel often like a weight. It'll feel sometimes like a sense of hopelessness even, in its very dramatic moments. It might feel like sadness, and so we can hold both those things together, that it is growth, and sometimes it just doesn't feel like growth. Instead, it feels like quicksand, it feels like mud, it feels like a volcano. Maybe that's a question you can answer. What does grief feel like to you? What hard things does grief feel like to you? And then what growth things does grief feel like to you? And how do you see each of those things happening in your mourning process, in your loss, and in your grief? And so we're going to reclaim mourning as an act to get to the growth. Reclaim mourning as an act to get to the growth. And you'll read about this, especially tomorrow on the blog at Heidi Gaiman Writes. What is mourning and how do we engage in that process this week and next week? So first, oftentimes we want to kind of avoid the physical connection with grief because there's already so much going on with it inside our body. So we want to really avoid any way to embrace it or kind of encourage it to stick around. But in reality, when we engage in the process, we're much more likely to move forward in the process, or at least identify that forward movement, than when we, feel instead that quicksand coming in and we just feel like, well, wait a minute, if I engage in this, isn't it going to last longer? Isn't it going to stay overnight for a while and all of that good stuff? Just knowing that it's counterintuitive, but when we engage in it and engage in the depth of the sadness, engage in some of that, real physicality of grief, the actual tears coming out, the letting the rage show itself in some way, shape, or form that's healthy and not hurting ourselves or other people. Those are good things to see some of the growth of grief and bring an awareness to that. So we're going to move from avoidance to confrontation. And I like, experts use the word confrontation. I like to use the word noticing. We're just going to notice what's going on in our bodies. We're going to notice what feelings come to the surface, what things come to our mind, what thoughts, and what things we want to do. That doesn't mean we're going to engage in sin or unhealthy things, but at the same time, allow yourself some space to just notice all the stuff that's going on. And when it is something that we can do that's not going to hurt ourselves or another person, then engage in that thing as an act of mourning. Notice it and then kind of confront it and say, hi, mourning. Okay, we're going to do this thing together because I know it's going to bring growth. And if I'm going to go through this loss, then I'm going to get some growth out of it, right? I'm going to see some light in this. And so we're going to engage in whatever our body is kind of telling us. Again, not hurting ourselves or other people. We have some boundaries here, but having a place to yell into our pillow, having a place to write down our thoughts that seem kind of dark or angry or frustrated or sad or whatever that looks like. And then we're going to go on to adaptation. That's how we really get this clear thing of growth where we start to accommodate for the loss in our life. That doesn't have to be early days. Please understand that. Like the process can be long and arduous sometimes. And also you might feel like you did some accommodation and then all the yucky stuff comes back up and we're reconfronting. Remember, growth is not like a linear line where you can't see that going up, 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 up. Instead, it's kind of a roller coaster and around and back under and over and up and all that good stuff. So adaptation or accommodation, as the experts in grief call it, is where we start to move in our lives with this new perspective of what life looks like when we've experienced a loss. We acknowledge the loss, but we're also kind of doing some things a little bit differently. So I don't know what that looks like for you. Please share in the comments. I'd love to hear how you've accommodated for a loss. So that might mean we might clean out some closets. We might do some things to change the way our household runs. Some of these things come because they have to come. Like I have to take the trash out because I lost my spouse. That's one that's like, hey, that might hold a lot more pain than we expect. Katie says, thinking about loss could not come at a better time. Good. Lost are normal, at least for a time. It's so true. I had someone and I accidentally assumed that they were talking about the coronavirus pandemic and all of the loss that people are experiencing right now with schedules and loss with activities that they very much loved, loss of connection with people, and then real loss with deaths and with illnesses and things like that keep moving even when we're in a struggle that's worldwide. And they actually said, no, I meant your loss came at a time that I needed it in my life for a loss that I had in the last year. And so I was like, oh, I'm so sorry to assume that. But whether it's a good time for you because of something that's already happened in your life, or because it's a good time for you because of where we are right now as humanity in a pandemic, knowing that God hears us in our loss and that we can connect still in these really wild ways with one another. I'm so glad for those of you that are joining us for Mental Health Monday. I do think that gives a lot of meaning to coming together in places and spaces that we may not have done before. So I'm glad you're all here. That's what I wanted to say about that. So knowing then, look at that. How are we adapting and accommodating in our life right now, even with the losses? So I want to tell you, there is no loss too small and no loss too large. We don't get to label loss in that way. You get to understand it for yourself, and I don't really think it's helpful to give it a size. Like, oh, that's a baby loss that this person had, whereas this person over here had a big loss. Excuse me, we are not going to do that. Instead, we're going to honor our loss for ourselves, and then when God has gifted us with this, we're going to sit and honor the loss with someone else. I'm going to tell you that I did not do this well in the last couple weeks with my own teenagers who felt a lot of loss in their lives in things that I labeled as small, and that's not okay. And so I had to ask forgiveness, and I had to seek in myself where that was coming from, why I was, needing to label things like that. But instead, I want to open spaces where we can honor one another's losses wherever that looks like. And so one way, I'm going to give you at the end of this video a way that we're going to actually do that in a physical, real way in our Heidi Gaiman Writes feed at the end of the week. But for now, I want to reflect on Rando's 6 R's of mourning. And so this is a growth-oriented grief process that he recognizes that we engage in kind of naturally, but then also we can engage in proactively when we are experiencing loss in order to mourn the loss and move through it intentionally instead of feeling like loss just is happening to us. That gives us some agency and some power in it, which is a really helpful thing for our mental health. When we feel agency and power, that helps us recognize we can't control everything, but we can control some things, and that feels good. That feels so good to know that there is some control that we have, even when it feels like life is swirling around us, and loss certainly does that in us. So Rando's 6 R's are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Recognize. We're going to recognize the loss. So just honor it. Here, I'm going to hold it here. So what is your loss today? I'd love for you to throw it up in the comments. Tell me, what is the loss that you've experienced in your life at any point? What's the loss that comes to mind? That's the one that we're going to deal with then. What's the loss that you've experienced recently, if you'd like to talk about that? Just kind of bringing that up and recognizing that loss is a really powerful thing. Then the second R is we're going to react to it. And so a lot of times this happens internally. It just happens. We don't necessarily control the reaction, but we can control parts of it. So how do we want to react to that? What do we want that to look like in our lives? Asking ourselves those questions, letting the internal stuff come to the surface, just naming it and noticing it. That's a really helpful reaction to grief. Don't shame yourself for different ways you react. Don't let anyone else shame you, but just recognize it and say, oh, there it is. That's loss. That's grief. This is part of the process of mourning, and seeking God in that and letting Him tend to that is a kind of confession also, and a kind of absolution from God in this time that's really hard when we're mourning. The third one is recollect and re-experience. Recollect and re-experience. So we're going to let ourselves bring the memories forward in their pain and in their joy. In their pain and in their joy. Letting ourselves take time to look at photos. If we're the friend, asking if someone would like to show us some photos, or if we could hear a story about the loved one that they've lost, using that loved one's name for ourselves and for other people. That's part of that recollection, re-experience. Number 4, relinquish old attachments. So this is not moving on. We're not like moving on from the people we love or moving on from the things that we love in our life, but instead processing it. So like understanding that there was an attachment there, saying that is something that mattered to me. And then recognizing that there has been a rip in the attachment, there's been somebody that has separated that attachment for us, or some, great cosmic thing that God has changed that attachment for now. And eventually, we have the hope in heaven, especially when we lose a loved one to death, that being like God is in charge of attachments, and imagining, using our imagination to imagine Him keeping that attachment for us until we, have it all together again. That's kind of relinquishing the old attachments. Processing, I think, is a good word for it. We're just kind of processing what that attachment looks like, how it's changed. Number 5, readjust to the new world without forgetting the old world. This one's so powerful. You do not have to forget that. You do not you don't have to move on, but we're adjusting. We're like letting our bodies move in new spaces and places in a different way. I hear this from widows a lot, that where I sit in church doesn't feel the same. When I sit down at the table, it doesn't feel the same. Recognizing that those spaces has changed is a powerful thing, and it's okay to mourn that and to say that out loud. That's really helpful, especially when we have a face to say that to, and know that God is always there and hears our loss in that. He recognizes it for us. And so just kind of readjusting to it. What can we do? Sometimes people like to sit with a framed picture of someone they love with them at a meal for a while, because we're readjusting to something new. That's one reason we kind of talk to the people that we've lost. We're readjusting to life without them. No shame in that. But then how can we grow in that also? How can we incorporate new people into our lives? How can we change our spaces and places and relationships to get what we need in this time of loss? And then the last one is reinvest emotional energy. And so there is a space where we need to know that there's a place for our energy, if you will. So we're giving all this time and energy to this relationship or this activity or this place if we've moved, those kinds of things, and just reinvesting it, putting that into a different bank. And that's, as you can see, it takes time to get there where it's like, I want to spend energy on something else. So often loss early feels like I don't have any energy, and that's okay. But as we move through and process, looking at new ways to invest our energy, new things to invest our energy into, and new ways to invest in even the energy of that relationship. But again, how does it look different? That's an act of mourning. And these are all, there's a lot of organicness to loss where we just kind of experience it and that's just the way it is. And that's, and we can say it is what it is. But these are ways that we move through it in an intentional way. If we can name and claim without like labeling and without shaming, but giving ourselves some space to kind of move in the loss and see what we need in that. So those are Rando's 6 R's. You can Google that. You'll find lots of articles and websites about it. There's a really good one I looked at funeralguide.co.uk was one resource I used to kind of help me understand those a little bit better than I had seen them in some other places. And so this is one way I think we make meaning, which we said we're going to talk about, is the last of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, which are the most commonly known stages of grief. This is the last stage that her, co-worker, if you will, her colleague added to those, which is making meaning, that God does bring meaning into our losses. And we can engage in that, again, proactively. And it's okay if you don't have the energy. It's okay if you don't see the meaning right now. Just coming before God, laying yourself before him and saying like, I need some meaning in this. I need some growth in this, and let him tend during this time is one of the most powerful things you can do for yourself. Making meaning in the loss, being able to see where that energy is going to go, being able to move and incubate a new space for our life and the loves in our life and the things that we enjoy, that instills some hope. That is God working to show us that he's still alive and well, that this world will keep turning, but we will not forget that person that we have lost, and that he does not forget. That's one thing God says over and over in the Bible. Even when we forget, he will not forget. And it just reconnects us to that person we love, to the things we love that are maybe no longer in our life or aren't in our life for a season right now. Those are really powerful things. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If you guys have any questions for me, please throw them up in the comments or send me a direct message, or you can always find me on the About page at HeidiGaiman.com. You can fill in the form to contact me. I'd love to hear from you. The next Mental Health Monday we're going to have is on Monday next week, and we'll finish out our grief series, which is Grief, What Not to Say. So it's more about caregiving and ways to come to people in their loss. But we also will have a special feed for Mental Health Monday on Friday. Mental Health Monday on a Friday. And I'm going to put a feed up that's called No Loss Too Small. And I want you to share, please share with me and share with others, what are the losses that you're going through right now or you've experienced in your life? And I want to hear every loss known to man, not just the loss of people in our lives through death, but I want to honor all those tiny little losses we're all experiencing right now. And if you can name a bajillion of them, I would love that, because someone else needs to hear you proclaim this is a valid loss. This is something we're going to recognize, and it is not too small. And so look for that on Friday on the Heidi Gaiman Writes Facebook page, Instagram page, and I would love to hear, just like I said, any loss at all, anything that you're sad about right now, anything that you're missing, and anything that we can honor alongside you. We'd like to sit with you in that. So find that on Friday at Heidi Gaiman Writes Facebook page and Instagram. All right, I will see you next time for Grief, What Not to Say. Look on that's not my website, HeidiGaiman.com for articles associated with this grief series as well. And we'll see you next time. Bye.